members of the State Duma, citizens of Russia. My address today will match the conditions we live in, the time we live in, and the challenges we face today. But first of all, I would like to thank you all for your support, for the unity and solidarity at this difficult time when the future of our country is being decided. This year we went through a test that only a mature and consolidated nation can go through. A strong state, a sovereign state. Russia has proved that it is capable of defending ethnic Russians, defending justice and fairness. Our country was able to do that thanks to you, the citizens of Russia. Thanks to your labor and the results we've achieved together, to your understanding of the meaning of our national interests, we've realized how our country is held together as it goes through centuries, and we believe that we are able to achieve many things together. Of course, we should also mention historic events that took place this year. As you know, in March of this year, there was a referendum in Crimea where the people of this peninsula clearly stated their desire to join Russia. Then there was a decision by the Crimean parliament, and I would like to emphasize that this was a completely legitimate body elected in 2010. So the Crimean parliament made a decision to declare independence, and eventually a historic reunification of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol with Russia took place. To our country, to our people, this event is particularly important because we have our people living in Crimea, and this entire territory is of strategic importance. And this is a spiritual source of the multifaceted Russian nation and centralized Russian state. It was in Crimea, in Herisonas, this historic area, which a Russian just called Korsun. This is where Prince Vladimir was baptized and later baptized the entire of Russia. Even though there were no clear borders back in those times, this territory and the economic activities of the prince, Christianity was a powerful source of unity that helped form a Russian nation, joining together different tribes in the Slavic region of the world. It was this foundation on which our forefathers recognized themselves as one nation for the first time in history. This enables us to say today that Crimea, Korsun, Kherson is of huge and civilizational and even sacred importance to Russia, just like the Temple Mountain is to those who follow Judaism. And this is the way we will treat this territory today and forever. Friends, of course, we should also mention today what we think about the events in Ukraine. We have to declare how we are going to build our relationship with our partners around the world. As we all know, Russia not only supported Ukraine and other sister nations among former Soviet republics in their aspiration to sovereignty. Actually, Russia helped them achieve sovereignty in the 90s, and our position has not changed. Every nation has a right to pursue its own path of development, its alliances, the structure of their society, the way they build their economy and their security. Russia will always respect all those matters. and this applies to Ukraine as well. Our sister nation. Yes, we did condemn the coup, the violent coup that happened in February in Ukraine this year, and what we see happening in southeastern Ukraine today demonstrates that our choice was right. I would like to remind everybody how it all started. It's even difficult to believe that it started from a technical decision by President Yanukovych to postpone the signing of the EU association agreement. He even did not refuse to sign the document, he only postponed the signing, and this was a fully constitutional decision by a legitimate and internationally recognized head of state. How can you support a violent coup, murders, violence? Suffice it to mention the bloody events in Odessa when people were burned alive. What about attempts to suppress southeastern Ukraine, suppress the protest of people who don't agree with this move? How can you do this, hypocritically talking about human rights? I strongly believe that the people of Ukraine will sooner or later offer their own understanding of these processes, and I would like to mention our U.S. partners because they always influence our relationship with our neighbors. Sometimes you don't even know whom you should talk to your neighbors or to their U.S. sponsors. This situation with the EU association agreement, there was no dialogue at all. They told us it's none of your business. They just told us to go take a hike. Simpler terms. Our arguments about CIS cooperation, agricultural cooperation, having unified structures, nobody wanted to even listen to all those arguments. And then we said, fine, if you don't want to have a dialogue with us, we will have to protect our legitimate interests unilaterally. We will not pay for your mistaken policy. So what happened as a result? The agreement between the EU and Ukraine has been signed and ratified, but the application of its economic section has been postponed. So this means we were right on the whole. This begs the question, why do all this in Ukraine? Why did they start this coup? Why did they start shooting? And they still keep shooting to this day, killing people. They destroyed the economy, financial sphere, everything. Instead of politicking today, instead of giving promises, what Ukraine really needs is help for its economy. Of course, this help should be given for the purpose of carrying out reforms, but for some reason our Western partners are not eager to do that, and Ukraine is left on its own. Actually, Russia has made a major contribution to supporting Ukraine. Once again, I would like to say that our banks invested about $25 billion in Ukraine. The finance minister issued another $3 billion in loans last year. Gazprom financed the Ukrainian economy for another $4.5 billion. So add all those figures and you will have about $32 billion, and this is what we did just recently. Of course, we have the right to ask a question. Why did this tragedy happen in Ukraine? Was it not possible to resolve all the differences through dialogue, legitimately, through lawful means? They're trying to convince us that this was actually the smart way to approach this situation, and we should blindly follow it. We will never do that. If there is a number of national countries who have forgotten about their national pride and they can't afford to act as sovereign nations, Russia absolutely cares about its sovereignty, and it is essential to our country. This has to be obvious to us ourselves, first and foremost. We have to be sovereign, otherwise we'll get diluted and lost in this world. And all the other countries, all the other international partners should realize that. And by realizing that, we should emphasize and strengthen the status of international law instead of conforming it to somebody's interests against the basic principle of international law, thinking that other nations are like small, illiterate people who don't know how to read or write. No, we have to respect all the international partners, and then it will no longer be missiles on navy vessels, it will be the principles of international law protecting everybody at the time of conflict, and then there will be no need to threaten other nations with isolations or sanctions, which are harmful, but harmful to everybody, including those who impose sanctions. By the word, I would like to say a few words about sanctions. This is not just nervous reaction by the US and their partners to what we did with respect to the Ukrainian coup or even the so-called Crimean Spring. I would like to emphasize for everybody sitting in this room today, if this did not happen, they would come up with another excuse to hold Russia back, to contain Russia, to influence Russia, or to take advantage of Russia, use it for the purposes of their own interests. This is the policy of interest that has been existing forever, for decades or even centuries. That's the policy that the West has been pursuing. Every time they think that Russia is too strong, too independent, they use these tools immediately. However, it is useless to try talking to Russia from a position of strength, even when it faces internal difficulties, as it happened in the 90s or in the early 80s. We remember which countries openly supported separatists and terrorists in our country during that time, calling those people who had their arms covered in blood freedom fighters. And those guys started making trouble in Chechnya today again. But our security services, I strongly believe that they will be able to deal with this situation. So let's support those guys doing their job today. Once again, I would like to tell everybody, we remember how at a very high level those terrorists were received as freedom fighters fighting for democracy. It was clear back in that time that the more we step back, the more insolent our opponents become, the more aggressive they act. Even though we were unprecedentedly open and willing to cooperate on various issues, no matter how difficult they were. You all remember that when we regarded our opponents as close friends and allies, those terrorists still received all kinds of support from abroad. And it was very obvious. And there was no doubt that they would be very happy to run the Yugoslavian scenario in Russia, with all the tragic consequences that follow for the people of Russia. Well, it didn't work out. We did not allow this to happen.
Just as Hitler failed with his misanthropic ideas, he failed to destroy Russia and throw us behind the Urals mountain ridge. So everyone should remember how these things end. Next year we will be celebrating the 70th anniversary of victory in the Great Patriotic War. Our army crushed the enemy, liberated Europe, but we also cannot forget the crushing defeats of 1941, 1942 in order to avoid similar defeats in the future. And this brings us to issues of international security, which are many, including combating terrorism, which we constantly see manifested throughout the world, and we will continue to engage in joint international efforts to combat terrorism. And of course, we will be dealing with other issues such as epidemic diseases jointly with the rest of the world. But I would like to talk about the most relevant and pressing issue in terms of international security. Last year, after the United States' unilateral withdrawal from the international agreement on nuclear arms, on strategic nuclear arms, which was the main pinnacle of global security in the world, the United States continues to create its global nuclear defense, missile defense system, including Europe, which creates a threat to stability to the rest of the world, including Russia, by affecting the global security balance. I think this is risky for everyone, including the United States, because it gives them this illusion of impunity and urges them to take unilateral action and excessive risks. We have addressed this at length on many occasions, so I won't go into detail. I would simply repeat, we are not going to get ourselves dragged into an expensive arms race, but we will ensure our defense capacities in an efficient and a cost-efficient way. There should be no doubt in this respect. It will be done. We have capacities and we have unorthodox solutions for that. No one will manage to get a military edge over Russia. The Russian army is state of the arms. It is combat. It has military capacity. It is polite, as people say, and we will have enough courage and will, if need be. We will continue to stand up for global diversity. We will continue to bring truth to people across the border, so that everybody would see a true image of Russia, undistorted. We will actively promote humanitarian, scientific, cultural contacts and relations, even in a situation when certain governments are trying to erect something like a new Iron Curtain around Russia. We will never choose self-isolation, xenophobia, suspicion, and a search of enemies deliberately. All that would be a manifestation of weakness, but we are strong and we are confident. Our purpose is to have as many reliable partners as possible, both in the West and in the East. We will expand our presence in regions which now engage in integration, where they remove barriers for trade, for technology exchange, for investment, for the free movement of individuals, rather than erect new borders. We are not going to roll back our relationship with Europe and with the United States under any circumstances. But at the same time, we will continue our cooperation with Africa, with the Middle East. We will expand our cooperation with Latin America. We have witnessed the Asia-Pacific region develop rapidly in recent decades, and Russia, as a Eurasian and an Asia-Pacific country, will actively engage in this process. We witness We know very well the global economic powerhouses, and many of them are our partners and friends. Starting since 2015, the Eurasian Economic Union will come into effect in full force. Its main features are pragmatism, mutual respect, the preservation of national sovereignty and identity of each and every member state. I am convinced that close cooperation will prove a strong driver for development for all member states of the Eurasian Economic Union. And summing up this part of my address, I would like to say that a healthy family and a healthy family, traditional values that we have inherited from our ancestors, together with a vision of the future, stability as a prerequisite for progress and development, respect for other nations while ensuring Russia's security and pursuing its legitimate interests. These are our priorities. Dear friends, in order to implement our plans, meet all of our government's social commitments formed by the presidential decree in May 2012, we need to answer the question, what are we going to do in the area of the economy, finance, social development, and most importantly, what is our strategic course? I would like to repeat, Russia is open to the world, is open for cooperation, for attracting investment and implementing joint projects. But most importantly, we need to understand and realize that our development depends on ourselves in the first place. We will be successful if we manage to create our own prosperity, rather than hope for a convenient economic situation or otherwise luck. If we manage to take under control inefficiencies and our habit of substituting real action with gobbledygook, we need to realize that inefficiency these days is a direct threat to our security. We are looking at a rather challenging time, and a lot depends upon each of us and our respective performance in our line of duty. The so-called sanctions imposed on Russia should be an incentive to reach our tasks even ahead of time, as soon as possible. We have a lot of tasks. We need to become competitive in production, form a shock-resistant reserve and support in our system. We have all the necessary reserves, human reserves, capital, and technology reserves to that end. We have young and talented people who are willing to learn and get educated. What we need to do is provide an opportunity for people to realize themselves, give them opportunities in the area of civil servants, the economy, social initiatives. That would be the best possible response to the outside pressure and to our domestic problems. The more actively our citizens engage in resolving their everyday issues, the more self-sufficient they are economically, and as citizens, the stronger and the greater will be Russia's potential. In this regard, I will just give you one quote. Who loves Russia should wish freedom for it. First of all, freedom for Russia itself, its international independence and self-dependency, its culture as a Russian culture and all other cultures forming it, and finally liberty for all people, faith, a freedom of faith, of pursuit of happiness. Ivan Ilyin. Now, this is very meaningful, and this is a testament for all of us today. Dear colleagues, diligent labor, private property, freedom of entrepreneurship, all these are basic, and I emphasize conservative values, same as patriotism, respect for your country's history, culture and tradition. We all want the same, and that is the best for Russia. And therefore, the relations between the government and the business should be based on a philosophy of a common cause, on equality and partnership. Of course, as in other spheres of life, in the area of economy, you need responsibility, you need law abidance, you need the rule of law. And the vast majority of Russian entrepreneurship acts exactly in this fashion. They value their reputation, and being true patriots, they want to bring added value for Russia. And this is the kind of people we should take as our role models, and we need to provide them with the conditions to work and achieve things. We keep bringing up the issue of the necessity of introducing order in our law enforcement and judicial authorities, but a lot of times this just remains talk. They provide obstacles and problems for thousands of law-abiding citizens rather than remove administrative balances. We need to relieve the Russian businesses of the imposing control, and I would like to emphasize this word. Every check, every inspection should become public. Next year, we will be launching a special register to this end with information of which government agency has initiated an inspection and to what end, on what the results have been. This will help us prevent unmotivated or rather illicit or corrupt visits of supervisory authorities and regulators to check businesses. We need to finally quit on the very principle of total, endless control. We need to monitor the situation where there are risks or signs of violations. You see, even today, when we've actually done some work on limiting the work of those supervisors and regulators, still we have so many supervisory institutions and regulators in Russia that if each of them were to visit a company at least once, it would have to close to shut down its operations. Next year, we will have to tackle this issue. As regards the system of checks and balances for the regulators, as regards small and medium enterprises, SMEs, I would like to propose so-called supervisory breaks or supervisory vacations for them. If a company has not shown any violations for 3 years, then for the next 3 years there should be no checks within governmental or municipal control of over this company, over this entity. Of course, this should not involve emergency cases which relate to issues of public health and security. But entrepreneurs need transparent and predictable rules, including those in the area of taxes, and I fully agree with this. I suggest that for the next 4 years we fixed the existing tax legislation, tax norms, and not revise them within this period. At the same time, we need to implement the decisions we have already taken to relieve the tax burden for entrepreneurs, for businesses, especially for startups, for small enterprises who register themselves for the first time. They will enjoy a 2-year-long tax vacation, tax break. The same will go for production being set up from scratch. I also propose a full amnesty for capitals that are returning to Russia. And I repeat, a full amnesty. And of course, we need to do some explanation, we need to do some education for people that are going to have to take the relevant decisions. What does it mean, a full tax amnesty? That means that those people who will fully legalize, who fully bring their capital to Russia, should be insured against being dragged to various law enforcement agencies and being investigated or probed about where they got their money, that there will be no criminal or administration investigations against them. Let us do it once, but right now, and let us give a chance to everyone who would like to return to Russia with their capitals. We all realize that money are made in different ways, and the origins of fortunes may be different. But I believe that we need to turn the page of offshore capitals in the history of our country. We need to end this period. It is very important, and I hope that after the memorable crisis of Cyprus banks, Russian businesses have realized that their interests are disregarded globally and that they can get ripped off or just merely robbed. abroad, and the best choice for them would be their own national jurisdiction, that is Russia, even given the existing problems, which we will continue to resolve jointly with our businesses. Russia has already gone a long way in improving its business climate. We have formed a new legitimate basis for business operations, and now we need to shift our focus to the quality of implementing this legislation. We need to promote the best practices in Russia's regions, and we need to have a national rating of investment climate across Russia's federal subjects. And next year it will be implemented, and we hope to revisit its results at the next meeting of the Government Council, the State Council. In order to create new productions, we need transport infrastructure and existing platforms in place, and regional authorities need to deal with the issue of improving regional highways and driveways. We will be taking measures for increasing regional funds, regional road building funds, and basically we need to work on doubling the rate of road construction across the Russian Federation. What I have just said has definitely been consulted with the relevant government institutions and agencies, and they have all confirmed that this is achievable. So we will be waiting for results from you, dear regional authorities. Next year, we will also launch a program for compensating regional authorities for their costs in setting up industrial parks, and we hope that the regions of Russia will use this to develop their technological potentials. We need to support technological development in Russia's strategically important regions. We've already adopted a law on a special economic area in Crimea. We will provide special conditions for developing industry, tourism, marine economies, fisheries in Crimea. In 2016, customs preferences will run out for the Kaliningrad region. Therefore, we will need to implement alternative means of supporting this region, which already have been deliberated and adopted, in order to preserve its competitive abilities and its quality of life for its citizens. And I would like to request the government to attend to this issue. I also suggest to expand the modality of tour for the so-called mono cities that are formed against a single production facilities, and we should not wait for 3 years with implementing this. We should not wait for 3 years, as the existing bill provides for. I believe it has already in the Duma and has had one session in deliberations. I think we should get down to working on this program right now. And of course, this program should play a very important role in developing Russia's Far East. We already have come up with plans for developing the major cities in the Far East, and we will be implementing it. I would like you to expand the capitalization fund of the Far East that should be used for setting up new production facilities and industries in the region. We have a very difficult discussion with the Ministry of Finance on this issue, as it usually is. So we should probably agree that at the first stage, this should exclude VAT payments, and then we should look at how it will develop. I will also propose providing Vladivostok the status of a free port with special capacities for attracting investment. I would like to remind you that a similar status has been assigned to Sevastopol and a few other port cities of Crimea.
We also need a comprehensive plan for the Northern Arctic Sea route. This should stimulate economic activity along the northern coast and development of the Arctic territories. Colleagues, the scale and quality of the Russian economy should match our historic role. We should get out of this trap of zero growth rate. In 3 or 4 years, we should achieve growth above the world average rate. This is the only way we can increase Russia's share in the global economy. strengthening our influence and our economic independence. The efficiency of our national economy should increase as well. Productivity should increase every year by at least 5%. The government should find ways to make this possible and implement these mechanisms efficiently. At the same time, we need to preserve stable macroeconomic situation, reducing inflation to 4% in mid-term, but not by suppressing economic activities. We should combine these two goals, curbing inflation and stimulating growth at the same time. Today, our foreign exchange revenues have dropped, and as a result, the exchange rate has dropped. As you know, central bank moved on to floating exchange rate, but this doesn't mean that the central bank will no longer intervene, and our exchange rate can be made an object of tax. I ask the government and the central bank to take action in order to make sure that speculators can no longer take advantage of the fluctuations of our exchange rate. The authorities know who those speculators are, and we have ways to influence those people. So the time has come for us to make use of these instruments. Of course, the weakening of the ruble makes inflation more possible, more probable in the short-term period, and the regional governments should control the situation with food prices, medication prices, and other necessary products. This should be done. At the same time, the weakening of the ruble, of course, makes our companies more competitive internationally. We should take advantage of this for import substitution, at least in the areas where it is necessary and possible. Within the next 3 to 5 years, we should provide people with affordable and high-quality food products and medications, produced mainly in Russia, of course. This year, Russia had one of the biggest harvests in our recent history in grain. Production growth in agriculture is about 6%. We have big, efficient agricultural companies, and we will support them. So let's say thank you to our farmers for the results they've achieved this year. We should also get rid of dependency on foreign technology and products, including energy equipment, drilling equipment, equipment for working on the Arctic shelf, and Russian infrastructure companies can really help us with implementing large transport infrastructure projects. They should give priority to Russian companies, Russian contractors. At this point, they do the opposite. They buy everything abroad, and this has zero effect for Russian science and Russian businesses. I suggest that we set up a special coordination center in the government, and the government should get more involved in these processes. Large-scale projects should sign contracts with Russian companies, use them as contractors, rely on them, using local products. As far as imports are concerned, if we buy something abroad, this should be unique technology, unique products. We should also rely on domestic manufacturers in terms of utility companies, transport, and so on and so forth. I also ask the government to take action to make it easier for small and medium-sized enterprises to win government procurement contracts. There should be a quota for small and medium businesses in government procurement programs. This will bring tens and hundreds of millions of rubles, with stimulating small businesses in Russia. Of course, the products of these contractors should be of high quality and should come at an affordable price. There should be no internal monopolization. Reasonable import substitution is our long-term priority. Regardless of the external situation, import substitution programs should produce a large number of industrial companies in Russia that would be competitive not only inside Russia but also on international markets. And we have companies like that in Russia which are highly efficient and they have export potential, very good potential, yet they face the lack of capital, personnel, equipment. We should address all those issues and create a real elevator for those companies so they would increase their capitalization, double, triple it, and get a solid position on international markets. I ask the strategic initiative agencies, the Foreign Trade Bank, and other institutions to prepare such a program, such a system. And next year they should implement the first pilot project on supporting Russia's non-commodity companies. There will be a credit support center for exporting companies. All non-commodity companies, both big and small, will be able to use this center for their work. We will provide about 30 billion rubles for this fund. The share of highly processed products should increase by 50% next year. To develop our non-commodity industries, we will need substantial funds, and Russia has these funds. We have a lot of reserves. We should invest those reserves efficiently. And despite the difficult situation internationally, we should bring the level of internal investment to 25%. What does this mean? Let me explain to you. This means that as much as we save, we should invest just as much. Our investment should work for our economy, should work for development, not for capital flight. This means that we should make the banking system much more reliable and stable. And this is actually what the central bank has been working on recently. Our financial market should not be that dependent on external risks. We should use our internal reserves, especially the National Welfare Fund, to increase the capitalization of our banks. This money will be supplied on the condition that this money will be used to subsidize the credit rate for industrial projects and project financing. As far as budget spending is concerned, it should be cost efficient. We should look for a high return rate, and we should take our current economic situation into consideration. Within the next 2 years, we should reduce our cost and optimize our costs by at least 5% from our real spending. Also, we have huge potential for our economy. It is quite obvious. If we look at government-sponsored construction projects recently, we saw some examples when money is invested to build some grand buildings, or the cost of building similar facilities is very, very different, even in locations that are really close to one another. I think it is necessary to centralize this work, preparation of construction, paperwork, finding contractors. This will help us overcome the current difference in prices, and this will allow us to save a lot of money in government-funded construction, about 10 to 20%, and we should apply this practice for all civilian construction projects funded by the government. I told the government to prepare their proposals on this issue. I talked to the Prime Minister yesterday. We had a discussion. Of course, there are a few risks in this matter. Since we know about them, we will be able to avoid them. Let's have a few pilot projects in a few different regions and let's see how it works. But we cannot afford to leave the situation as it is today. Like I said, you have very similar buildings being built, and the cost of construction is highly different. This is a direct threat to national security when money, government subsidies are embezzled in the defense industry. If there are cases like that, we should take a very serious approach to them. This is the same as fighting terrorism. The reason I bring this up is because there is nothing for us to hide. Just recently we had our regular meeting in Sochi with the top-level commanders in the defense ministry and the chief constructors at different defense factories. Prices have doubled and tripled for some products. There was one case where price was 11 times more than it used to be. This has nothing to do with inflation or anything like that. The government makes down payment, pays almost 100% in advance for the project. Once again, I would like to ask our law enforcement agencies to look into this. The Financial Surveillance Service and the Defense Ministry should implement a new system supervising defense spending. Also, the liability of defense contractors should be increased for the way they spend every ruble. We should also look at the budgets of government corporations. They should have a single treasury that will make it easier to oversee their spending. The headquarters should keep tabs on their subsidiaries and the way they spend their funds. All companies with a large share of government interest should reduce their costs by at least 2 to 3% every year. The payroll for executives in government corporations should match their performance. Colleagues, I strongly believe that Russia is well capable of modernizing its economy and become a source of new ideas for the whole world. We can be the leaders in the production of products that will be popular worldwide. Our companies should be symbols of our national success, national pride, just like our atomic or space projects used to be. We've adopted new environmental standards, new bills, new legislation that introduce best practices, newest technologies. At the same time, we should also consider how we will address our problems. I suggest that we launch a national technology initiative based on long-term prognosis. We need to be able to tell which problems Russia is likely to face in 10 to 15 years and what technologies we may need to ensure better life for our people, security and development. We should join forces of different creative designing teams and energetic companies that can develop modern technology. We should use our research centers, the Russian Academy of Sciences, and leading scientists. Of course, we should also invite ethnic Russian researchers from abroad, those who really can offer something substantive to this project. I suggest that the government, together with the Strategic Initiative Agency, organize this work. It is important for businesses, designers, people working in these areas to formulate what kind of support they need, what kind of barriers they face today in their work. We can make all those modern technologies work if we have the right people. Unfortunately, many of our engineers in our schools are not directly involved in real production in their respective industries. So let's stop pursuing quantity. Let's focus on the quality of our engineering education. We should train our engineers in strong schools that have direct relationship with their industries and working in specific regions. By 2020, at least half of Russia's colleges should have training courses for 50 most popular, most necessary professions. We should look at the results of contests, professional contests. This is a practice that is widespread in the world, and Russia has joined it. This is not just a step to increase the prestige of working professions. We should also follow the we should base our professional standards on the highest international professional standards. As you know, we participate in various international contests in different working professions. I don't have this data with me today, but I can tell you from my memory, it's very interesting that we had 3 teams from our leading companies, then we had students, and they were school children, ages 14 to 17. And they had to perform different tasks, standardized tasks. And the most difficult task was performed most efficiently by school children, ages 14 to 17. This included the space industry. They had to come up with a space vehicle, and they also performed some basic work. And they were actually competing with the skilled professionals. So they were ahead from workers from our leading companies, and they were also ahead of our students from our best universities. So what does this indicate? That actually we have very good potential, we have very good young people in Russia, but this also means that we need to change a lot in our professional training. This is what I've been talking about. We should take an informal approach. We are all clear what we need to do. We just need to start doing it. Start doing that and then keep doing that. Because, you know, this happens again and again. It's just the quality of our professional training has changed. Still, the core of economic development is having trained, skilled professionals, workers. We should never forget about that.
And of course, we need to create a network of certification centers where each employee could attest to their qualification. Now I would like to touch upon a new issue, dear colleagues, demography. In the beginning of the 2000s, UN experts were predicting further demographic decline to Russia. According to UN forecasts, Russia's population by the end of 2013 was supposed to have shrunk to 136 million people. As of January 1st, 2014, Russia's population was almost 144 million. That is 8 million ahead of the UN forecast. I would like to add that for 2 consecutive years, 2013, 2014, Russia has been witnessing a natural increase of its population. And we expect that by the end of 2014, with Crimea and Sebastopol taking into account, Russia's population will exceed 146 million. Our demography promotion programs have proved their efficiency, and we will continue implementing them. We will extend them in full onto the population of Crimea and Sebastopol. Crimean families who have delivered a second or more children after 2007 will receive maternity benefits in full extent. I would like to draw your attention to another important aspect, which is rather telling. This year, in the global healthcare rating, Russia, for the first time, rated as a country with a satisfactory level. That is a life expectancy over 70 years, and Russia, it is over 71 years. I think that we have every capacity to expand life expectancy in Russia to 74 and reach a positive dynamic in decreasing mortality. Therefore, I would like to propose announcing that the year 2015 will be a year of combating coronary and cardiovascular diseases, which rate as the #1 cause of death in most developed countries. We need to unite healthcare professionals, culture workers, public services, and civil society organizations in working to this end. Of course, the victorious Sochi Olympics of 2014 have played an important role in promoting a healthy lifestyle in the nation, and I would like to congratulate its organizers once again at this glorious event. And finally, of course, I would like to say my most warmest words for the Paralympic athletes. Dear friends, you've become the true heroes of Russia. Thanks to you, public perception of people with disabilities has begun to drastically change, and I'm confident that our society will be truly united if we provide equal opportunities for all. Government support programs should include programs for professional education and employment for the disabled, for forming a comfortable environment for them in all spheres of life. And I would like to extend the comfortable environment program, the enabling environment for the disabled program, through the year 2016. We also need to create an up-to-date, state-of-the-art industry for producing articles and goods for the disabled. As for healthcare, we need to transfer to insurance principles while polishing all our operations to avoid inefficiencies and disparities. We've been debating this for a long time, but insurance medicine has not truly taken shape and begun operation in Russia. We need to create a centralized system to assess the quality and the performance of medical establishments and medical organizations. And I would like to request the government to ensure the necessary changes to the legislation, to the law. I also would like to propose providing a special education certificate for healthcare professionals, for medics, which should enable them to select an optimal retraining program for for themselves or additional professional training for themselves. Education techniques and methods should be as convenient for healthcare professionals as possible. And apart from professional training, personal qualities have always been highly assessed in the area of medicine, and that is devotion, dedication, commitment, and the willing to help people. These are the things that our healthcare relies upon, and we need to provide the necessary conditions for this kind of people, for this kind of professionals to work and to implement themselves fully. Dear colleagues, yesterday, for the first time in many years, they were writing a composition as an exam in Russian schools. This is very important in forming an outlook on the world among students and a right approach to teaching among educators. And I would like to ask the educational community and the Ministry of Education to analyze the results of that examination in order to encourage children to get new knowledge. I would like to note that the single government exam has enabled many teenagers from minor townships and localities, from families with lower income brackets, to enter some of Russia's best universities. We need to provide additional support measures for those who show their penchant for creative or technical sciences and have excelled themselves in international academic competitions or have publications in scientific magazines or industrial publications. This kind of human capital is very important for a country, and I would like to propose handing out 5,000 presidential grants a year, 20,000 rubles each, for this kind of promising students, valedictorians. For the entire period of studying at a university or college, we need they'll be receiving these scholarships. Of course, they should come with certain conditions. The student should commit to working in Russia for a number of years, and secondly, to retestify, to recertify for receiving these grants with their personal grades and with their personal achievements. Of course, every teenager should have an opportunity to find some walk of life to their own liking in the world. And therefore, I believe that terminating a system of additional education is unacceptable. Creative arts, creative education, and sports education are very important additions to average education. And I do encourage Russian authorities to look at this issue. It is important that children and their families should have a choice whether they could receive additional education in municipal or non-governmental organizations or not. This should be accessible, this should be affordable, and it should be truly well-trained education professionals who will be working with children. And another important issue that I already touched upon in my last year's address, and that is that our classrooms, our schools are crammed and overcrowded. We need to provide 4.5 million additional studying places, studying seats. Many school students now have to study in 2 shifts, to go to school in 2 shifts, in some places even in 3 shifts. And now, thanks to this positive demographic trend, we are looking at a possibility of getting an additional 2.5 million school students in the nearest future. Yesterday we discussed this with my colleagues from the government, from the Cabinet of Ministers. We need to implement the presidential decrees regarding kindergartens of the year 2012. But we also need to remember this issue with the availability of seats, of places in secondary schools, and the government will need to look at it. Dear colleagues, healthcare, education, social support, social security, must become issues of true public good, public value. They need to serve our entire society. We cannot imitate education, we cannot imitate healthcare or social security, we cannot imitate caring for people. We need to learn to respect ourselves, and we need to look at this important notion such as reputation, and that the reputation of a specific hospital, school, institute or a social office is a building stone in the overall reputation of our country. Our citizens should not be concerned about where they will be receiving education or healthcare services, in a state-owned establishment or in a private one. Those services must be good quality. All the rest, it is up to the government to provide the necessary work of organizations and establishments that provide social services and public services. We will further continue the work of NGOs that unite people working in public service areas. They usually unite people who know how important compassion is, how important helping people is, and we will have to use their expertise in implementing our social initiatives. We will need to alleviate discrimination in this area and remove all barriers, not only legislative barriers that already have been removed, but even those that are still there, administrative barriers, bureaucratic barriers. We need to provide equal access for non-governmental organizations to financial resources. Competition is a decisive factor of increasing the competitive ability of our social service institutions, and we also need to provide transparency about the activities, the performance of social sphere organizations. And I request the All-Russian Popular Front, together with other public organizations, to take it upon itself to develop a strategy. I hope to have a meeting next year with the representatives of the private sector, and we will talk about the changes that we've managed to achieve lately. We also need to think about expanding the number of fora for dialogue between society and the government. In the first place, that should be the public chamber, the federal public chamber and regional public chambers. They all should get involved in providing expertise for legislative bills, especially within the context of the so-called zero revision or zero reading, which should be a mechanism of feedback between legislators and society. We can see how constructive citizens engage in this kind of debate these days. They pose questions to the government, but they also get involved in addressing those issues and resolving those issues. They realize that a lot depends on their personal effort. And it's these outstanding commitments and contributions from the citizens that play such an important role in the life of our country. Everyone who is ready to assume responsibility should be involved in implementing our programs for the nation, for developing the nation. If society and the government have a single agenda and they counteract and collaborate in the area of confidence, that is very important and productive for the nation. And I would like to turn to all the interested stakeholders. I do look forward to our constructive collaboration. The interests of Russia require this kind of joint effort of us. Dear friends, dear citizens of Russia, I would like to close today's address with the same issue that I started off with. As it's happened many times at crucial moments in history, this year the Russian people have demonstrated their vitality, their high spirits and their patriotism. And the challenges that we come across actually offer us new opportunities. We are willing and ready to accept any challenge of today and emerge as winners. Thank you very much.